Okay, hey, welcome to Atlas Forge. This is Andy Morbitzer, CEO. Today we're going to talk about part one of a three-part series on strategic metals. As you know, last week we had the world-renowned Bodo Albrecht on, who's a technology and strategic metals expert that gave his recommendation of the strategic metal that he sees great utility for and what is going to become the manufacturing of smaller, more fuel efficient and airplanes for commercial use. And that seems to be the sentiment around the world. So welcome to the call. This is Atlas Forge, the educational platform. Today, part one is emerging markets and what does that mean for strategic metals. And when we first start out, some of you know, some of you don't. Nicole and I have traveled the world over the last couple of years. And the reason why we started Atlas Forge, the educational platform, was simply because there was a fear and uncertainty and the populace. There's a movement. There's a reckoning, if you will, where people are starting to understand the internet made everybody connected. And we can collaborate and we can learn a lot of things from a lot of different cultures and countries from around the world. But when we traveled there, the sentiment was pretty much the same. They all feared paper assets. They all feared central banks. And that led us really to where we are today. And I always start out my trainings and stuff with really the problem. And some people, I get on conversations and they say things like, well, Andy, that's unpatriotic, or Andy, you should only buy American, or Andy, you should, and understand, I'm a red-blooded American just like everybody else. I served in the military. My background is all financial products, and I do it from a standpoint of business. The world is interconnected now, and to survive and succeed and thrive in the world of finance, you have to open up the coffers. The world is a big place, and there's a lot of opportunities around the world. So what I really look at is the once powerful empire, the United States, that was the beacon for hope and prosperity, not to mention freedom, has been replaced by terminally declining economy. It's fiat currency. And the countries of the world, everybody is really paired to or part of the system of fiat currency. And we can see throughout history that fiat currency simply don't work. And every financial vehicle that we use to invest or get a dividend or help fund our retirement or grow and save money is based on a debt consumption ecosystem where it's all fueled by fiat money that is inflated, fiat money that's manipulated, fiat money that is declining in purchasing power. So that led me to think, okay, somewhere along the line, Wall Street and the investment vehicles that I would use to retire aren't what they used to be. They're not reliable. They're very risky at this point, in my opinion. So that led us to look into, okay, what other kind of assets could we get involved with where we own, controlled, and maintained our own currency, in essence, becoming our own bank? Because the morals and the ethics of many central banks and regulator type people, well, they don't have my best interest at heart. And I found it very frustrating and challenging where the industry that I grew up in, the industry that I invested in, both personally, professionally, was, well, it was a legalized casino. So when we look at America, why we usually start with the basis of America is because most currencies are pegged to the US dollar. Most currencies go through what we call the SWIFT system. But America's kind of lost its edge. America's not viewed as it once was. So we talk about morals and ethic. There's a saying, heavy is the head who wears the crown. Well, what that means is there's a lot of responsibility and there's a lot of pressures, and that gold crown increases in weight over time, and your neck gets weaker and weaker, and sooner or later, if you're not doing the right things, why, of course, the crown tumbles to the ground. And that will ultimately end what we've been calling for 150 years of the American Empire. It replaced the British Empire in the 1870s. And then approximately 1913, down off of Jekyll Island, South Carolina. Well, of course, they came up with this scheme called the Federal Reserve and the Ponzi scheme. Well, people are getting wiser and people are feeling indentured by the people who control the money. That's why Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is so daggone popular, is because it gives we the people the ability to have our own currency, or our own money, I guess I should say, that's not inflationary, that's not decentralized, that doesn't need third-party affirmation. So strategic metals and emerging markets, why I talk about cryptocurrency, because everybody's going to have the phone, everybody's going to have access to capital. So when we look at the grand scheme of things, emerging markets, we all know that there's debt, and of course there's reason for concern. The people around the world are ill prepared because the great American empire is declining. And you can see that in the world's highest debt, highest country debt, consumer debt, credit card debt, student loan debt, price to earnings ratio on the stock market, meaning it's a bubble. All these things have an effect on your money, and your well-being, and your quality of life. So when I look at emerging markets, I want to see where the future is. I want to see where the population explosion is, because just like we experienced here in the Western world, in Europe and the United States after World War II, and you had the population explosion, that population drove economic and macroeconomic explosion. It led the stock markets, the pensions, the labor force, the production. And you're going to see the same thing play out around the world. So that's the problem, but here's the solution. Emerging markets, and I just spoke to it briefly, everything that drove the United States and Europe after the Second World War was the population. Now we have a very unique event going to happen. We're going to have a population explosion, and simultaneously, we're going to have a technology revolution that's going to bring billions of people into capitalism, smartphones, computers, and so forth. So we've got the perfect scenario for a huge, huge explosion in demand in strategic metals. Why? Because when you add, you can see, the money and the growth comes through emerging markets overseas, where the population of the middle class is exploding, and it will be the fastest growing segment through 2030. So for the next decade, all of these people that are coming into the middle class in the Sudans, Malaysia, that's 3 billion people. That's almost half of the world's population, and they'll have access to capitalism. That's huge. That is a habitual product: computers, the internet, smartphones, smart cars. This means they're going to have their first opportunity to be an entrepreneur, have a bank account, buy, sell, get into cryptocurrencies. It's all going to happen through 5G and the mobile network and smartphones. You got to understand, quantum mechanics are what's driving 5G. When you can download a movie in 5 seconds that's 2.5 hours long, or you can have real-time data, that's what's going to drive the technology of drones, satellites, and smart homes and electric vehicles that allow them to stop in an inch as versus 6 feet. As technology develops, every single one of these devices are going to need these circuits that are totally reliant on strategic metals. So this emerging class will know all the conveniences this newfound life has to offer. It's the convenience, it's the simplicity of it, it's the future. So instead of ignoring the future, you should properly build your foundation and your asset allocation. Strategic metals provides hedge, insurance, diversification, assets in a different regulatory authority. It's in a different country. It's expected to go off the charts in demand. So whenever you added a technology explosion, with a population explosion, you see the results of what happened over the last 50 years in the stock market. You know, as people and the population exploded, they all needed new homes, new cars, clothes, you know, appliances. This is what we're entering into. But now the future is electric cars, drones, robotics, solar panels, solar energy, green energy. All these things consume the supply of strategic metals. So that's what we're getting into. And let's see here. Strategic metals, according to some industry leaders around the world, account for 85% of all products made: electronics, cell phones, solar panels, rockets, weapons, robotics, space, not to mention everything electronic. So what we have is a class of 3 billion strong entering into capitalism, the 21st century, combined with a population explosion. And most experts, by the next 2 decades, will hit 10 billion people. So not only are the 3 billion people that are in the lower to middle class going to move up in economic class, we're going to add another 3 billion people to what is already a dwindling supply. That some of these strategic metals are less rare than gold and silver. So it puts an enormous strain on natural resources and strategic metals. These metals are already scarce. And as an economic realist, and that's really what I qualify myself as, I position myself accordingly because it makes sense. Emerging markets, strategic metals are one of the most valuable assets on the planet. They allow you to diversify abroad without obligation. Because, you know, there's a difference between gold and silver as a hedge. And I always caution people with precious metals, and we'll get into that next month, which is this month is strategic metals, this being one of 3. We'll get into the difference between a hedge, say, maybe as a strategic metal that has an industrial use or utility versus a biblically used money in gold and silver. The advantages of gold and silver as a hedge versus advantages of strategic metals as a hedge. There's 2 different thoughts I have on that, and I'll share in the coming weeks. So you're starting to get the idea of, we live in a world of the future. It won't be long before we have you know, drones that will start bopping around off of rooftops and special landing places. Everything in the future that I can see for the next 2 decades are going to be dominant by these nanotechnologies, these microchips, this artificial intelligence. It's the future. So, you know, I always come back and say, Wayne Gretzky was a great hockey player, but he wasn't bigger, faster, stronger than any other hockey player. What made him so great was he positioned himself because he knew where the puck was going to be. So he had a huge advantage. And that always comes back to my mind. Same thing applies with strategic metals. We know what the future looks like. We already know that these mobile devices will dominate. We've got an internet, we've got communication, collaboration around the world. Now we have blockchain and cryptocurrency that will expedite and move money seamlessly. We have an addiction with social media that all use these devices. So when I look at the numbers, and we'll get into that next week when we get into all things electronic, we're going to get into mandates set by countries that tell you this is how many cars they're going to build in the next decade. Huge, of India's, Malaysia's, China, the demand for strategic metals in every aspect of electronics. I think it's the diamond in the rough, no pun intended. With that said, this is a perfect scenario for a savvy investor. These are ways to acquire strategic metals and vault metals in duty-free zones, both industrial and institutionally, for the first time. See, before we came along, I only knew of 2 companies that you could get industrial or strategic metals, rare earth metals. But you had to have a business account. You had to be in the industry, had to be a trader. And oh, by the way, to even buy any one product or a basket of different products, the starting point or the entry point was $100,000. So we're the first one to actually bring this to market at a price point where you can do dollar cost averaging, you can save over the life of your retirement, your hedging, but we can also do higher volume. You'll see in the coming weeks where we'll put together some baskets that will diversify you within an industry, an electronic industry, an aerospace package, somewhere for mobile devices, where we took the best of the best strategic metals, we bundled them, usually 2 or 3 metals per basket, and they'll come in at a price point that is somewhere, right around $20,000 thereabouts. So we'll have the best of both worlds. We'll be able to make the price point $50 or $100, dollar cost averaging, set up a long-term savings plans for these people. And then today, and I'll end the call this way, next week we'll get into all things electronic. I wake up this morning and I get notified on I watch certain tech publications, certain tech investors, and definitely the NASDAQ, because they're all technology stocks and I can learn a lot from it. So I get the text or the warning this morning that Tesla, even though you've heard the rumors that they've had some monetary or financial problems, whether it's Tesla or whether it's another company, I really don't care. The main point about what I learned today was they just secured a deal for land in Shanghai, in China, for a mega manufacturing plant, $500 billion mega plant that can generate 500,000 electronic vehicles a year. So when I look at the decision to get into strategic metals, knowing that the future, the next decade or two, the commitments that are being made by countries in India, the mandates for carbon, green, I couldn't be more pleased, and I couldn't think of a better place to have. Remember, we always diversify. Strategic metals is one on the wheel, but what a great real property asset that you own, maintain, and control. So this is the overview for emerging markets, strategic metals. Next week, Atlas Forge, we're going to do another overview. We'll have part 2, all things electronic, next week, and we'll quantify some of these mandates and usage and give you a better perspective of for example, an iPhone right now has 5 microchips in it. So that's 5 microchips for every Apple phone. So we're going to see hundreds of billions of these chips being made over the next decade. Exciting stuff. Thanks for tuning in today. With that said, that's it for today, guys. Have a great day, and we will talk again, next week. So thanks for joining us. Take care. Goodbye.